I woke up screaming, and I wasn't alone. The burn beneath my collarbone wasn't from a ritual, and it wasn't from the man I was promised to. It was a brand from a stranger, a jagged silver mark that appeared in the dead of night, smelling of ozone and ancient shadows. In our world, an unrecognized mark isn't just a scandal, it's sacrilege. When the sun rose, I didn't find comfort. I found a jury. My fated mate, the alpha I had spent my whole life preparing to lead beside, didn't ask who had attacked me. He didn't offer protection. He took one look at the foreign scent on my skin and delivered the death blow. I reject this bond. He chose his reputation over our destiny, leaving me to face a pack that now saw me as a traitor. They expected me to crawl into the woods and disappear. They thought the stranger's mark was my ending. They didn't realize it was a homing beacon. The man who marked me isn't a wolf from any map or any council. He is the one they tell stories about to keep alphas humble. And he didn't leave that mark to claim a prize. He left it to signal the end of the old world. If you've ever been abandoned the moment things got difficult, if you've watched your protector turn into your judge, stay with me. Because the mate who rejected me is about to realize that the stranger he's so afraid of is already standing right behind him. Comment and subscribe. If you believe rejection doesn't end a story, it ignites it. They had told her whole life that fate was precise, that destiny did not make mistakes. From the moment her wolf awakened, the seers traced her thread and spoke her future aloud with ceremonial certainty. She would be Luna. She would bond with the alpha heir at the appointed time. She would strengthen the pack's legacy. She believed them. Why wouldn't she? Her entire world was built on the promise that some paths were guaranteed. The destined alpha had grown beside her, close enough to feel familiar, distant enough to remain untouched. He treated her with polite restraint, eyes cool, expectations heavy. They never spoke of the bond, but everyone else did. When, not if. So when she woke that night, choking on pain that wasn't hers, she thought it was death. The heat under her skin was unbearable, spiraling outward in waves that left her shaking. Her wolf howled inside her, not in recognition, but confusion. Panic set in when the scent followed, flooding her senses with something foreign and dominant and terrifyingly final. She staggered into the dawn with the mark blazing against her skin. The pack saw it immediately. An unknown claim carried consequences older than any law. Marks were not suggestions. They were declarations written in blood and soul. And no one recognized it. The seers circled her in stunned silence. Elders whispered behind hands. Wolves who had once smiled now looked at her with something like fear. "Who did this?" someone demanded. She shook her head helplessly. "I don't know." The destined alpha arrived last. He didn't rush. He didn't look concerned. He looked distant. He stopped several paces away, nostrils flaring as the stranger's scent brushed against his awareness. She watched his jaw tighten, watched him make a decision before she could even speak. "It's not mine," he said coldly. The words cut deeper than any blade. "I know," she said hoarsely. "I didn't—" "I reject it," he interrupted. "And I reject you." The world went silent. Public rejection was rare. Public rejection after a marking was devastating. Her knees buckled as the bond she had been promised her whole life collapsed in on itself, not breaking cleanly, but tearing, leaving something raw and exposed in its wake. The stranger's mark reacted instantly. The heat surged, not possessive, not demanding, protective. She gasped as the mark flared, answering her distress without command, without proximity. The pack recoiled as her aura shifted, reinforced by a presence that was not there, but was coming. "You've doomed us," an elder whispered. "No," a seer said faintly, staring at the mark with dawning horror. "She's been claimed." The destined alpha turned away from her, as if she were already a mistake history would erase. She stood alone in the center of the pack, marked, rejected, and suddenly untethered from the future she had been promised. That was when she understood something fate had never bothered to explain. Destiny did not protect you when things went wrong. And whatever stranger had marked her in the dark had done something far worse than claim her. He had set her on a path where rejection was no longer the end, but the beginning of something fate could no longer control. The mark did not fade. That was the first thing she noticed when the pack dispersed and silence crept back into the clearing like a second judgment. No cooling, no dulling, no retreat into something survivable. It burned. Not like an open wound, but like a brand pressed too deep to ever forget the shape of the fire. She stood alone where they had left her, fingers trembling at her side, every instinct screaming at her to run even though there was nowhere left to go. The destined alpha's rejection still rang in her ears, each word replaying with merciless clarity. "I reject it. I reject you. Public, final, absolute." Her wolf curled inward, not snarling, not fighting, confused and hurt in a way that felt dangerously close to breaking. Bonds were meant to anchor, to define, to protect. Instead, hers had collapsed before it ever formed. She took a step forward and nearly stumbled. The ground felt wrong beneath her feet, as if the land itself had shifted its allegiance. Whispers followed her movement. Wolves watching from doorways. Eyes sharp with judgment and fear. Marked by a stranger. Rejected by destiny. She made it to the edge of the pack territory before her knees finally gave out. She fell hard, palms scraping dirt, breath tearing from her chest in broken gasps. "Get up," she whispered to herself. "You don't get to fall apart here." But the mark pulsed again, hotter now, reacting to her distress with a fierce, protective surge that startled her badly enough to cry out. The sensation was unmistakable. Someone far away had felt her pain. That terrified her more than being alone. She pressed her forehead to the ground, trying to block out the bond's resonance, but it only deepened. Steady, grounding, infuriatingly present, not claiming, guarding. "I don't know you," she whispered through clenched teeth. "You don't get to decide this." The response was not a voice. It was certainty. "I already did." Her breath hitched. She staggered to her feet, wiping at her face with shaking hands. Staying here meant being watched, judged, blamed for something she hadn't chosen. She left the pack at dusk with nothing but a cloak and a blade. The forest swallowed her quickly, shadows closing in as night fell. She moved on, instinct alone, feet carrying her along old paths she had never been meant to walk. The mark guided her, not pulling, not dragging, but subtly clearing the way. Branches bent, thorns parted, Predators avoided her. That scared her most of all. Hours later, she sensed him for the first time. Not a scent, not footsteps, a presence. It pressed against the edges of her awareness like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Vast, controlled, restrained by choice rather than limitation. The mark flared in response, heat blooming across her collarbone as if answering a call only it could hear. She spun in a slow circle, blade raised, heart hammering. "Show yourself," she demanded, voice raw. "If you're going to ruin my life, at least have the courage to face me." Silence, then movement. A shape resolved itself between the trees, tall and unmistakably alpha, but unlike any she had known. He did not stalk, did not loom. He stepped into the moonlight like it had been waiting for him. Dark hair streaked with silver, eyes like deep embered gold. Power coiled around him, not wild, not careless, but contained, as if he carried violence the way others carried breath. The stranger. Her mark burned hot enough to steal the air from her lungs. "You," she whispered. His gaze dropped instantly to the mark. Jaw tightening, not with satisfaction, but with something dangerously close to regret. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said. Her laugh was sharp and broken. "You marked me in my sleep." "Yes," he replied evenly, "and I would do it again." Rage surged, cutting through fear. "You destroyed my bond, my future, everything I was promised." He took a single step closer and stopped when the mark flared, responding not to dominance, but restraint. "What was promised to you was a lie," he said quietly. "And the alpha who rejected you knows it." She swallowed hard. "Then why didn't you wait? Why didn't you come to me openly?" "Because they would have killed you," he said flatly. "Or bound you so tightly you'd never be free again." Her breath caught. "You were being prepared," he continued, "to be sacrificed to a future that benefited everyone but you." The words hit too close to something she had never let herself name. "You don't get to decide my fate," she said, voice shaking. "You don't get to replace one cage with another." "I'm not offering you a cage," he replied. "I'm offering you choice." The bond surged, powerful, steady, unbreakable. Behind him, the forest seemed to lean in, listening. "I am not your destiny," he added. "I am the interruption." She stared at him, chest heaving, the mark burning between pain and protection. Marked by a stranger, rejected by the mate fate had chosen, and standing on the edge of a truth far more dangerous than either. She did not lower the blade, not when he spoke, not when the bond pulsed with a steadiness that made her knees weak. Not when every instinct screamed that he was telling the truth in a way lies never dared to. "You don't get to rewrite my life and call it protection," she said, voice raw but unbroken. "You don't get to mark me and then pretend this is about my freedom." The stranger held her gaze without flinching. He did not advance, did not bare teeth or flare dominance the way alphas did when challenged. "That's why I stopped where I did," he replied calmly. "Because if this were about control, you wouldn't be standing." The forest around them felt restrained, as if something vast was deliberately holding itself back. She took a shaky breath, then started explaining, slowly and carefully. He inclined his head once. "Respect, not submission. My name doesn't matter yet," he said. What matters is that the mark you carry was never meant to be given in secrecy. It was meant to awaken under consent, yours. Her fingers tightened on the blade. Then why didn't it? Because your destined mate would have bound you first, he said. And once that happened, your choice would no longer exist. The words struck harder than the rejection itself. He rejected me, she snapped, publicly. Yes, the stranger said, because the moment he sensed my mark, he realized you were never meant to be his. Her chest burned, not from the mark, but from something dangerously close to grief. Then why did fate say he was? Because fate doesn't distinguish between fit and convenience, he replied. Only alignment. She laughed bitterly. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, he said honestly. It's supposed to make you angry. The bond hummed, low, affirming. You were born into a role, he continued, raised to be compatible, obedient, useful. You were never taught to ask whether the future they handed you required your consent. She remembered the lessons, the smiles, the careful distance the destined alpha had always kept, as if she were a role waiting to be filled rather than a person. You're saying they would have used me, she whispered. Yes. The word landed without mercy. Your rejection wasn't about the mark, he added. It was about exposure. He couldn't claim you once it was clear you weren't what he expected. Her wolf stirred then, uneasy, wounded, but not broken. You still marked me without asking, she said, lifting her chin. You don't get to stand above that. The stranger exhaled slowly. You're right. The admission startled her. I did it because time was running out, he said. And because once the destined bond snapped into place, nothing could have pulled you free without killing part of you. Silence stretched between them. She lowered the blade an inch. So what happens now? Now, he said, you decide whether this bond continues. Her heart slammed against her ribs. I can't break it. No, he agreed, but you can deny it. The bond reacted instantly, not in pain, but in tension, like a held breath. If you deny it, he continued, the mark will fade, slowly. It will cost you clarity, resonance, parts of yourself you've never touched, but you will remain free of me. And if I don't? Then the bond will stabilize, he said. And the world that rejected you will have to answer for it. Her gaze searched his face for arrogance, for hunger, for triumph. She found none. What do you want? She asked quietly. He hesitated for the first time. I want you alive, he said. Whole. And not owned by a future that only values you when you behave. The mark warmed, not claiming, not demanding. Waiting. She turned away, pacing a few steps into the clearing, breath unsteady. The night pressed in around her, but for the first time since dawn, it did not feel hostile. She thought of the destined alpha's eyes when he turned away. The relief buried beneath disgust. The way he hadn't even asked what she wanted. You knew this would destroy my place in the pack, she said. Yes. You knew I'd be blamed. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes. She faced him again. Tears burning but unshed. Then if I keep this bond, it won't be because you saved me. He met her gaze steadily. Good. It will be because I choose it. The bond surged, not wildly, but deeply, like a foundation locking into place. She closed her eyes, fingers curling over the mark as heat spread. Not painful now, but stabilizing. I won't run from this, she said, but understand something. He waited. I will not be claimed in the shadows, she continued. If this bond stands, it stands in the open, and you will answer for what you did. A slow, dangerous smile curved his mouth, not smug, not possessive, relieved. I wouldn't accept anything less, he said. Far away, under the same moon, the pack felt it, the bond settling, no longer chaotic, no longer hidden. And the alpha who had rejected her woke with a sharp, unfamiliar sensation in his chest. Not loss, fear, because for the first time, the future had chosen someone else. The bond settled like a held breath finally released. Not gentle, not overwhelming, deliberate. She felt it anchor deeper as her decision crystallized, not snapping into place like destiny's brittle promises, but weaving slowly through her senses, testing, stabilizing. The mark cooled from a burn to a steady warmth beneath her skin, no longer reacting to fear, but to presence. The stranger watched her closely, as if gauging whether she would bolt, now that the choice had been named. She didn't. Then we don't hide, she said firmly. Not from them, not from him. His jaw tightened, not with resistance, but calculation. You understand what that means. I understand I've already been humiliated publicly, she replied. Anything less than truth would be cowardice. The bond approved, low, steady. He inclined his head. Then we returned to the pack. Her stomach twisted, but she nodded once. On my terms. They traveled at dawn, not racing, not sneaking, side by side. The forest reacted differently now, paths clearer, scents layered but no longer threatening. Wolves watched from the tree line as they passed, some startled, some wary, all aware. The mark was no longer hidden. The bond carried openly now, unmistakable and stabilized. By the time the pack gates came into view, the tension had already spread ahead of them. She felt it, the ripple of recognition, the sharp intake of collective breath as watchers caught her scent. Whispers ignited, doors slammed, others opened cautiously, eyes wide. The destined alpha stood at the center of the clearing when they arrived. He had not expected her to come back. She saw it in the way his posture stiffened, in the way his gaze flicked involuntarily to the stranger at her side, and then to the mark he could no longer ignore. You have nerve, he said coldly. She stepped forward alone, leaving the stranger a respectful distance behind her. You rejected me publicly, she said evenly. I'm here to answer that rejection. Murmurs rippled. You were marked by another, he replied. That ends the matter. No, she said calmly. It exposes it. His lip curled. You think flaunting that stain gives you leverage? The bond stirred, not aggressively, clarifying. I think you rejected me because I stopped fitting the future you were promised, she said. Not because of honor. Gasps followed. The Destined Alpha's dominance flared instinctively, but faltered, meeting resistance where obedience should have been automatic. The stranger stepped forward then, presence rolling outward, not in challenge, but in undeniable weight. Wolves stiffened, elders went pale. "Who are you?" the Destined Alpha demanded. The stranger met his gaze coolly. "The consequence of your certainty." The mark flared, not hot, not violent. Visible. Seers pushed through the crowd, eyes frantic as they stared at the bond's stabilized glow. "That mark shouldn't hold," one whispered. "It was incomplete." "It was interrupted," the stranger corrected, "by your interference." "You violated fate," an elder snapped. She laughed softly. "So did he," she said, gesturing to the Destined Alpha, "when he rejected me without asking what I wanted." Silence slammed down. "You don't get to claim victimhood now," she continued. "You made your choice." The Destined Alpha's gaze sharpened. "And so did you." "Yes," she agreed, "after you took mine away." The bond pulsed, truth resonating outward. The seers exchanged panicked looks. "If that bond holds," one said hoarsely, "it will override the destined thread." "It already has," the stranger replied. The Destined Alpha took a step back, realization dawning too late. "Then the pack will survive," she finished, "just not built around you." That was the blow that landed. Not the bond, not the mark, but irrelevance. "You don't get to decide my worth anymore," she said quietly. "You forfeited that right." The stranger's presence shifted then, not expanding, not threatening, anchoring. "I did not mark her to replace you," he said to the Destined Alpha. "I marked her because you were going to break her and call it duty." The Destined Alpha snarled. "You think that makes you better?" "No," the stranger replied evenly. "It makes me responsible." The pack watched in stunned silence as the bond held, unwavering, undeniable, chosen. The seers felt it then, the collapse of a narrative they had guarded for generations. Fate did not shatter. It moved on. She stood straighter, breathing easier than she had in years. The rejection wound still ached, but it no longer defined her posture. "Remember this," she said, meeting the Destined Alpha's gaze one last time. "You rejected me when it was easy." The bond warmed. "And you'll live with that longer than I ever will." She turned away before he could respond. The stranger fell into step beside her, not touching, not claiming, walking with. Behind them, the pack did not howl. They questioned, and that, more than any victory, told her the truth. The story had shifted, and it would never bend back the way fate wanted. They did not chase her. That alone told her how deeply the ground had shifted. As she and the stranger, no, her bond, she corrected herself, walked away from the pack, no alpha barked an order. No seer called for containment. The clearing behind them buzzed with tension, but it was the unsettled kind, the sound of a structure realizing it no longer sat on solid ground. Only once they reached the forest's edge did she stop. Her breath came steady now, no longer ragged with adrenaline or shame. The mark beneath her collarbone pulsed softly, no longer reactive, no longer defensive, chosen, stabilized. "You didn't need to say all of that," she said quietly without turning. "You could have let them tear into me and stepped in later." "That would have taught them nothing," he replied. "And it would have taught you the wrong lesson." She faced him then, eyes sharp. Which is? That protection comes after harm, he said. I don't believe that. The bond warmed, not flaring, not tightening. Agreement. They continued deeper into the forest until the sense of the pack faded into something distant and irrelevant. Only then did the stranger allow himself to lean back against a tree, exhaling slowly, as though holding tension he had refused to show. You're shaking, she observed. So are you, he countered gently. She hadn't noticed. Her hands trembled faintly, not with fear, but release. She pressed them together, grounding herself. You said my bond would fade if I denied it, she said. What you didn't say is what happens if others try to break it. His expression darkened. Then they'll learn why marking without consent was forbidden in the first place. She studied him closely now, not as an unknown force, not as a threat, but as someone who had deliberately taken responsibility for a dangerous choice. You still haven't told me who you are, she said. A pause. My name was stripped when I crossed the boundary, he said quietly. Among my people, names are earned through consequence. She lifted a brow. And among mine, secrecy is how we avoid accountability. A corner of his mouth twitched. Fair. He straightened, gaze steady. I am the alpha of the Black Reach. The territory your seers pretend doesn't exist. Her stomach tightened. Rogue land. Your pack survives because you don't answer to anyone, she said. No, he corrected. We survive because we choose who we answer to. The bond hummed, resonant. That mark, she said slowly, just made me your political problem. Yes, he agreed. And your choice made you my equal. That surprised her more than anything else. They rested through the afternoon, sharing food in silence that felt earned rather than awkward. When she slept, it was without fear of being watched. When she woke, the mark remained, cool, steady, unafraid. By nightfall, the consequences arrived, not as soldiers, as envoys. 3 wolves approached the forest boundary cautiously. Alphas from neighboring packs, scents sharp with uncertainty rather than aggression. We felt the shift, one said carefully. The bond moved. She stepped forward before her bond could, voice level. Then you know the truth. One alpha's gaze flicked to the mark, then away. The destined alpha has lost authority. The seers are divided. Good, she said. They exchanged glances. You're destabilizing the region, another said. If bonds can be overwritten, they weren't overwritten, she interrupted. They were withdrawn. The distinction landed. You want order, she continued. You want predictability. You want to know who controls the future. Silence. You don't get that anymore, she said, but you get honesty. The bond pulsed, not as warning, as promise. The envoys withdrew, shaken but thoughtful. Later, beneath the moon, she finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. Why me? He didn't answer immediately. Because you survived rejection without becoming cruel, he said at last. Because your wolf didn't turn feral when your bond collapsed. Because you didn't beg to be reinserted into a future that discarded you. She swallowed. You could have chosen someone easier, she said. I did, he replied softly. Once. The bond tightened, not painfully. Truth, not confession. I won't be owned again, she said firmly. He met her gaze. You won't be. They stood together beneath the moon, not entwined, not claimed, aligned. Behind them, the pack she had left fractured, not in violence, but in questions they could no longer ignore. Ahead of them lay a territory that did not worship fate, only choice. She touched the mark once, not to test it, not to deny it, to accept responsibility for it, marked by a stranger, rejected by the mate destined for her, and walking forward anyway. The black reach did not announce itself with borders. There were no carved stones declaring authority, no ward lines humming with dominance, no banners warning outsiders to keep their distance. That was the first thing she noticed as they crossed into it, the absence of force. The forest grew denser, older. Trees leaned close, as if sharing memory rather than threat. Wolves watched them from the shadows, but none stepped forward to challenge or submit. They observed, assessed, chose whether to engage. This is your territory? She asked quietly. Yes, he replied, or rather, ours. The bond stirred, not possessively, inclusive. A woman emerged from the undergrowth ahead, tall and scarred, her scent sharp with authority earned rather than inherited. She took in the mark beneath the collarbone, then met her eyes directly. So, the woman said, voice calm but edged, this is the one who shattered 3 packs in a single morning. She bristled instinctively. I didn't. You didn't try, the woman continued, which makes it worse for them. The woman turned to him. You brought consequences home. Yes, he said, and choice. The woman studied her again, then inclined her head. Not a bow, not submission. Welcome to the Reach, she said. No one will touch you here without permission. Her chest loosened a fraction. They moved deeper, past communal fires and shelters built into the land rather than imposed upon it. Wolves greeted him with nods, brief words, unforced respect. No one stared at the mark too long. No one whispered. That alone made her throat tighten. At the central clearing, they stopped. This is where disputes are settled, he said. No seers. No destined claims. And if someone breaks the rules, she asked, then they answer to those they've harmed, he replied. Not a prophecy. The bond pulsed, steady. Later, as dusk settled, the Reach gathered, not to judge, not to demand explanation, to listen. She stood beside him, heart racing, hands clenched at her sides. He did not speak for her, did not introduce her with title or justification. She stepped forward herself. I was marked by a stranger, she said clearly. Rejected by the mate fate promised me. Murmurs rose, then fell. I didn't choose the mark, she continued, but I chose what came after. Silence held. If you fear me, she added, say it now. No one did. A young wolf stepped forward hesitantly. Does the mark hurt? She blinked, startled by the simplicity of the question. It did, she admitted. When it was hidden, when it meant shame. And now? She inhaled slowly. Now it feels like standing upright after years of crouching. Something eased in the clearing. Later, alone near the fire's edge, she finally allowed herself to feel it. The grief she hadn't named, when the destined alpha turned away. The loss of a future she had built herself around. "I thought if I did everything right, I'd be safe," she said quietly. He sat beside her, not touching. "That's what obedience promises." "And fails to deliver," she finished. The bond warmed. "I still hate that you marked me without asking," she said. "As you should," he replied. "I will carry that." She turned to him sharply. "You don't get absolution." "I know," he said simply. "Only accountability." The reach settled into night. Fires low, voices soft. For the first time since the mark appeared, she slept without dreaming of rejection or fire. At dawn, a messenger arrived from her old pack. "They're convening a council," the wolf said stiffly. "The destined alpha has been challenged. The seers want you returned." She laughed softly. "Returned to what?" "To resolution," the messenger said. She stood slowly. "Tell them this." The messenger waited. "I am not a problem to be resolved," she said. "I am a choice they lost." The wolf swallowed, nodding once before retreating. She turned back toward the reach, toward the life forming not from destiny, but from intention, marked by a stranger, rejected by fate's favorite son, and finally, standing somewhere that didn't ask her to shrink. The council did not wait. They never did when fear scented blood in the water. By the second dawn in the Black Reach, riders arrived from 3 territories, some bearing emissary marks, others hiding steel beneath diplomacy. The old packs had felt the shift the moment her bond stabilized in the open. Fate didn't like being corrected quietly. She stood at the edge of the central clearing when the first delegation arrived, watching their expressions tighten as they took in the land. No banners, no kneeling wolves, no visible dominant structure to anchor their expectations. "This place violates every protocol," one alpha muttered. "Yes," she replied calmly. "That's why it's still standing." The alpha stiffened, clearly not expecting her to speak first. "We demand clarification," another said. A bond was disrupted, a claim overridden. A rogue alpha interfered with destined order. She tilted her head slightly. "Which part unsettles you most? That fate was wrong, or that I survived it?" Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Her bond stepped forward then, not flaring dominance, not posturing, just present. His presence alone was enough to quiet the clearing, the way storms hush birds without striking. "You marked her without sanction," an elder snapped. "You destabilized the lattice." "I stabilized it," he corrected evenly. "You just don't recognize the pattern because it doesn't benefit you." "You stole her from a rightful alpha," the destined alpha's brother accused, finally revealing himself at the edge of the gathering. She turned to face him, spine straight. "He rejected me." The brother's jaw tightened. "Because you were compromised." "No," she said softly. "Because I was inconvenient." The bond pulsed, supportive, steady. "She was promised," the brother continued, "raised for ownership," she cut in, "utility, silence." Her voice did not rise. That frightened them more than anger would have. "You want to put me back into a system that discarded me the moment I stopped being compliant," she said. "I won't return." "And if we force you," an alpha demanded. The forest responded before she did. Not violently, not dramatically. The ground thrummed once, deep, old, warning. Wolves stiffened as the Reach answered its alpha, its territory recognizing choice as law. No attack came, just pressure, a reminder that power did not always need spectacle. "You'll start a war," someone whispered. "No," her bond replied. "You'll start accountability." The seers arrived last, breathless, robes rumpled, eyes wild with something close to panic. "The thread has rewritten," one gasped. "We can't locate the original destiny." "Because it ended," she said simply. A younger seer stared at her in dawning horror. "You weren't meant to choose." She smiled faintly. "Neither were you meant to decide for me." Silence fell, heavy, unsettled. "You think this ends with you?" the Destined Alpha's brother snarled. "If bonds can be rejected, if marks can be chosen, packs will fracture." "Good," she said quietly. "Maybe then you'll stop calling obedience unity." That was the moment the threat became clear. Not of war, of change. The delegations withdrew one by one, not defeated, not convinced, but shaken. They would carry the story back to their packs. Some would distort it, others would test it. That night, alone by the fire, the weight finally hit her. "They'll keep coming," she said softly. "Yes," her bond agreed, "and they won't always ask." "No." She looked at him then, really looked, at the restraint he carried like armor, at the patience it took not to dominate a world that expected him to. "You didn't mark me to be safe," she said. "No," he admitted. "I marked you to be free." Her throat tightened. "What happens when the next girl is rejected?" she asked. "When she doesn't have a Reach to walk into?" "Then we build more," he said. The simplicity of the statement stole her breath. By dawn, wolves began to arrive, not envoys, refugees, a Luna cast aside for failing to conceive, an Omega punished for refusing a forced bond, a Beta marked without consent, then blamed for it. They came quietly, hesitantly. She welcomed everyone, and in doing so, she understood the truth at last. This was never about her mark. It was about the moment rejection stopped being a sentence and became a signal. The Black Reach did not become a refuge overnight. It became a mirror. Those who arrived expecting rescue were disappointed. Those who arrived expecting absolution were challenged. What the Reach offered was not safety from consequence, but safety to change. She stood at the edge of the growing settlement at dawn, watching wolves wake to a life that had never been promised to them. No hierarchy dictated where they slept. No seer announced who they would become. Disputes were loud, decisions were slow, but no one was discarded. "They'll call this dangerous," she said quietly. Her bond, no longer stranger, no longer interruption, but chosen partner, stood beside her. "They already are." "They'll say we're weakening the packs." He nodded. "They said the same thing about mercy." The Reach continued to grow, not as a rebellion, but as a precedent. Wolves came not because they hated their packs, but because they wanted a choice before obedience. Some stayed, some left after finding their footing. That was the point. News traveled faster than envoys ever could. In distant territories, a young Luna refused a forced bond and survived. In another pack, a marked Omega demanded accountability and was heard. Seers rewrote texts not to preserve fate, but to document its failures. And in her old pack, the destined alpha lost his challenge, not to another alpha, to doubt. The council fractured under questions it could no longer silence. The future he had been raised to inherit slipped quietly from his grasp, not stolen, but abandoned by those who no longer believed destiny excused cruelty. She did not celebrate when she heard. She felt lighter. One evening, as the moon rose full and clear, the Reach gathered without being summoned. Fires burned low. Wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, not ranked, not ordered. She stepped forward, not because anyone asked her to, but because she understood what this moment required. "I didn't come here to lead," she said, voice carrying easily through the clearing. "And I won't stay, if that's what you expect." A ripple of understanding moved through the crowd. "I was marked without consent," she continued, "rejected without mercy. I survived not because I was special, but because I refused to disappear." She met eyes across the clearing, some wary, some hopeful. "If you stay here," she said, "you stay because you choose it. And if you leave, you take that choice with you." No howls followed, no kneeling, only a quiet, powerful agreement. Later, beneath the trees where the forest pressed close and protective, she stood with him at the boundary of the Reach. "You don't regret it?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "I regret the pain, not the path." The mark beneath her collarbone glowed faintly, not as a brand, not as a claim, as a record, marked by a stranger, rejected by the mate destined for her, and no longer defined by either. She looked toward the horizon, where old packs still stood, and new ones were beginning to imagine themselves differently. "They'll tell this story wrong," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, "they always do." "But they won't forget it," she added. The bond settled, not blazing, not demanding, chosen, renewed. Together, they turned back toward the fires, not as rulers, not as symbols, as two wolves who had refused to let fate finish the sentence for them. She was marked by a stranger and rejected by destiny's chosen. But when she chose herself, the world learned that fate only holds power until someone says no.